everyone. Thank you for tuning in. I'm Christine Petit, Executive Director of Long Beach Forward. I'm here today with Victor Sanchez, Director of the Long Beach Coalition for Good Jobs and a Healthy Community. Hey, Victor.
Hey, how are you?
Doing well, thank you. Thanks for being here today. How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm excited. I've seen these happen before, and so I'm glad that it's my turn and I get to share a little bit and talk a little bit with you.
Awesome. Well, so happy to have you here. This storytelling series was created by the nonprofit partnership to connect with nonprofit leaders during the COVID-19 pandemic and to see how organizations and the people in them were navigating these new realities that we're in. And now, over the last few months, we've seen major demonstrations and movement across the US and throughout the world in affirmation of Black lives and against police brutality. So we're in this really important moment, and I am so excited to have you here. Can you just start out by telling us a little bit about yourself and the work of the Long Beach Coalition?
Yeah. I'm born and raised in LA. I think for me, coming around in terms of the greater LA area, I come to this work from the perspective of an immigrant family. And for me, that lived reality kind of set the values, I think, for me in wanting to pursue this kind of equity and justice work, which really at the core of it is about providing economic opportunity for everyone. And so I really got lucky actually being able to work at LAANE, to work at an organization that aligns so closely with my values and being able to help bring these kinds of values, I think, to Long Beach in particular. And so I get to direct LAANE's project, the Long Beach Coalition for Good Jobs and a Healthy Community. It's a project that has been around since 2008, and then I was just telling somebody the other day too that the good thing is that we've been around for a good minute. I think since around 2006, 2007, which ironically I think was at the height of the last economic recession, or just about when it was getting started. And so here we are, fast forward, about 10, 12 years, where we're dealing with a similar situation. And unfortunately, the issues in a lot of ways aren't all too different. Our organization was founded on lifting up, the standards for low wage workers, in particular in the hospitality sector here in Long Beach. It's a sector that's fairly large, but there's a lot of low-income immigrant women of color. And so for us, it was really important to raise the standards in that industry in hopes of influencing and improving the standards across, for all workers in Long Beach. And so our work has primarily, come through that economic justice angle, trying to fight for equity for these low wage workers, in particular in the hospitality industry. But I think, we've also kind of understood that you can't just work on issue-based campaigns. You also have to work on civic engagement to help kind of move the needle as well. And so in partnership with you all at Long Beach Forward, right, we have our Long Beach Rising initiative, which, we're trying to train the next generation of amazing leaders in Long Beach to do boards and commissions trainings, but also to become activists themselves, and to engage in the electoral process, which we think is just as important as some of the issue organizing and solidarity work that we've been doing in Long Beach.
Absolutely. I mean, LAANE's presence in the Long Beach Coalition has been critical in so many ways in even just shifting the political landscape of Long Beach. Starting probably before this, but for me, I've been involved also, or was involved in the coalition for many years, and seeing Measure N, the living wage for hotel workers and other protections for hotel workers, seeing that pass by 64% of the voters, and seeing that pass in every district when at the time the city council would not approve a policy like that. It really showed that voters in Long Beach are more progressive than oftentimes our elected leaders are. And so that critical work that LAANE and the Long Beach Coalition did at that time was so important, just in kind of creating a new reality, and then also training up through the civic engagement, through People's State of the City, all of that, really just helping people, everyday people, understand how to get involved in the decisions that impact them. So it's been really critical, and you've done a great job since you've come in as director and really picking up that work and helping to move it forward as well. Yeah. So we're in this big time. What shifts has the Long Beach Coalition and LAANE as a whole had to make in light of COVID-19? And how are you navigating those shifts?
Yeah, I mean, I think COVID-19, it sent shockwaves, I think, everywhere. Not only is this a once in a century public health crisis, I think the economic fallout of it is also, just as horrible, I think, in a lot of instances. And so, the crisis has really put everybody, in a frenzy to try and pass as many worker protection policies as we can. And so, LAANE, I think, we've tried to do our best, to leverage our regional reach to work to pass transformative policy during this window, right, of a crisis regionally. And that means doing it in LA City, as well as in Long Beach, as well as throughout the county. And so we've been dug in pretty deep, obviously working with our allies on council. Huge shout out to Mayor Robert Garcia, as well as council members Janine Pierce, Rex Richardson, and a whole host of other folks that we've been able to work with in partnership with the LA Federation of Labor to try and pass policies like paid sick days, making sure workers have paid sick days, making sure that those workers who are laid off are able to be recalled to their job, and that they don't lose seniority. Because I think that's also very important, is that folks have oftentimes been in their jobs for multiple years, and they're not every employer, but you do have employers who have a strong incentive not to bring longtime workers back in order to save costs coming back. But when you look at the impact that has on the health and stability of the local economy, it doesn't make sense. We have to look out for workers' well-being. We also fought to get a provision called worker retention. During this period, and we saw this in 2008, hotels or other businesses will be bought and sold. And so ownership transfers often means workers will lose their jobs. But with this policy, there isn't, in fact, a process that allows workers to be retained in those instances, whether it's bankruptcy or an ownership change, which again is important for stability. And then I think also just health and safety protections. You have a lot of frontline who have been deemed essential workers, grocery workers, drug retail workers who are providing and became frontline workers during this crisis, right? Workers that oftentimes don't have the necessary workplace protections and provisions needed to do their job effectively and safely. And so making sure that they had paid hand washing breaks, that they had the needed PPE to make sure they're doing their job accordingly. Those are things that we helped advocate for, and in conjunction with our allies, were able to win. And so it was almost a sprint to try and get these things done because of the immediate need. We were very happy to be able to do it. We saw a groundswell of support from people engaging. We had a list going into this, I think, of about 180. We went from like an e-list from 180 activists that signed up for People's State of the City to about 800 plus during this period. And I think it's because people saw the need to be engaged, the need to fight for these things. And we were out there obviously providing a vehicle for that to happen. But I think it's also because folks see the need to put in as many safeguards as possible. And so COVID really changed the game. And I think, it's not just on what we're trying to pass, it's in how people participate, right? You don't have regular public comment, you have e-comments. And so that in and of itself presents challenges and barriers for people to present and speak on different items. You don't have in-person gatherings. And so things are over the phone, via text, or over Zoom, or Facebook Live, or Instagram Live, right? And so it's also pushed our organizing. We've had to be creative. Things like digital strategy, which have always been more complementary than upfront in terms of what we have done, have had to become front and center.
Right.
And so, it's also pushed our boundaries to be creative, and have forced us to innovate a little bit in terms of how we're engaging people. And so I think moving forward, because there really is an end in sight, and, as much as we want to be optimistic, we need to operate with what we can control. We've had to make some big shifts that I think are going to be the case, at least for the next few months. And so, Yeah, I mean, in short, COVID has changed everything, and obviously, it has impacted folks' public health and well-being.
Mhm.
A lot of lives that have been lost, which has been really sad and unfortunate.
Mhm.
It has also impacted workers, and in particular, vulnerable workers of color,
Mhm.
who have lost their jobs and their financial stability. And
Mhm.
I'll say this too, I don't want us to seem that it's like things got worse, only because of COVID.
Right.
We need to remind ourselves that income inequality was horrific pre-COVID. We were
Mhm.
amidst a housing crisis that we have never seen. Rents
Mhm.
were skyrocketing through the roof.
Mhm.
And so it's not like things have been, were gravy before COVID. Things were already bad as it was.
Mhm.
We were working to improve those conditions, and COVID really just kind of came and made things a lot worse, I
Mhm.
think, in a lot of ways. But I think, if anything, has kind of strengthened our resolve to try and get these things done. And so there's a window of opportunity, I think, that we're trying to take advantage of,
Mhm.
and trying to use this groundswell of awareness that folks have kind of have come to realize, and try to pass for as much great public policy as we can.
Absolutely. Like you said, COVID has changed everything, but not the fundamentals of the inequality that we were already seeing, the crises that were already here. It has just, for those who weren't aware of it, it just made it a lot more clear what was happening. But these health inequities, they were there long before COVID-19. These ways that people are just in very precarious situations. um, this is just reminding me, earlier on in this series, I talked about how COVID has shined a light on these inequalities. And I was talking not too long ago with Dawn Modkins, one of the co-founders of Black Lives Matter,
Yeah.
and she was kind of pushing back on that a little bit, saying it didn't expose the inequities, it exposed the inaction. And so now we're
Mm.
seeing this moment, like you said, there's these opportunities to take action, because so many people are seeing the realities right now. Yeah. And I
I think
know that you
that's a
all
really good
you
way to
all
put
have
it.
been very active on the housing issue too, in this time. And so it's like those workers' protections, but also housing. People can't shelter in place when there's no place to be, or when they're precariously housed. Um,
Yeah,
yeah.
no, there's so much truth to that statement, for sure.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, like, we've been trying to do the most that we can to support, other movements, and I think housing is one super important aspect of the work that maybe hasn't gotten as much support as it could.
Hmm.
And we've been super happy to be able to help support Libra and Housing Long Beach, and a lot of the other groups that are trying to mobilize to get the tenant relocation ordinance, to get the eviction
Hmm.
moratorium, and to get all these amazing victories that we have been able to get.
Hmm.
Inclusionary housing is moving forward, and so yeah, you have to look at it holistically.
Yeah.
Is that where there was an action, now there's an opportunity to take action, and so how can we
Yeah.
push and make that happen?
Right. Absolutely. So right now we are in this time where people are pushing and calling to shift resources away from policing and towards social services and support. Um, how would that impact the communities that you work with?
I mean, I think, primarily working in North Central and West Long Beach, like, these are the communities that we're talking about who are probably impacted most by police brutality,
Mhm.
around the conversation, in terms of communities who would directly benefit from the much needed resources that they have long been deprived of.
Mhm.
And I think when we're talking about this conversation, I think it's important to understand root causes, right? And getting at root causes. We can't keep thinking. I think the old is like the adage, like, if you give somebody a hammer, well, they're going to think a lot of things are nails.
Mhm.
It's how do you go about and do preventative investments? How do you do early investments in communities so that we're trying to uplift them, rather than be punitive in the approach that we have in addressing these problems that folks have told us really are readily happening all over the
Mhm.
place. And so I think, when you have investment in early childhood education programs and youth development programming and jobs trainings, like, you're getting at the root causes of a lot of the issues people are identifying that think a remedy is immediately police.
Mhm.
I think we need to do a better job of owning our power as residents and identifying solutions to what the problems are, and think beyond the status quo as whether or not the police is an actual solution for nonviolent issues that may arise in a community. Right there, I think we've talked about it on odds and ends in terms of the need for more mental health awareness, the need for potentially more social workers, right, to be able to diagnose situations from a broader perspective in terms of direct services that may be needed, right? Even housing and insecurity that comes with housing insecurity. All these things have root causes to them. And I think this conversation has really kind of opened the book in allowing us to debate where resources should be going. And really looking with a watchful eye in terms of, what do we need to be spending our money on? Is it in the public benefit to be spending, close to 50%, on the police, or can we direct resources over to invest in communities that have long been disinvested in, for too long, to make sure that they have the equal opportunity that they need to be able to succeed and to be able to live their fullest lives.
Absolutely. Yeah, when people talk about defunding the police, it's really a call to invest in communities, invest in families, invest in all the kinds of supports that you need to have a holistic and healthy society. That preventative approach to things too. And it's not just preventative, it's justice, right? And that is one of the areas we're seeing a lot of people engaged in our city's budget process too. And I know you're part of that as well.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think the people's budget has been around for a long time. I know it's picked up steam more recently in LA, but I know that the work that Long Beach Forward has done, in helping, as well as other organizations, like, it's important to have a community response to where, the budget should be prioritized. Because it may sound cliche, but a budget is a reflection of your values, and what better document or effort to have than a people's budget that is guided by community values, right? I think you're seeing misalignment between what people in the community want and what has been presented in a lot of different jurisdictions, and it's a conversation that needs to happen. It's not an easy conversation, but it's one we have to have.
Absolutely. So we have COVID-19, this public health crisis. We have uprisings around police brutality and this movement for Black lives, and this call to look at our communities differently. And then we have an election coming up in November. So can you share a little bit about LAANE's work and the Long Beach Coalition's work as you look toward November, and just what should be on people's mind as we prepare for the election?
I mean, I think first and foremost, people need to vote. And it's, as cliche as it is, I think, every vote does count and every vote matters. And people will say, well, everybody says every election is the most important election of our time, because every election is the most important election of our time. And if there was ever a time for you to make sure you're registered to vote, that you have a plan for voting, it's actually this year, because there's a lot of things that are changing. And that's actually how we're approaching the work at the Long Beach Coalition is, I mentioned civic engagement. One of the things that we're trying to prepare for is not only trying to educate community members on a lot of the propositions that are set to come out via the statewide ballot, but the county, is also going to potentially have another ballot initiative that's going to be on the county locally, right? Long Beach will have maybe a provision on the ballot to be voted on. And there's just races up and down that people need to be paying very, very important attention to. And so, I think for us, one of the big things we're going to need to try and communicate to everybody is, if you haven't certified or just made sure that your voter registration is up to date, please do. Because it was mentioned about a month or so ago, but everybody is going to be receiving a vote by mail ballot this time around. So if it wasn't enough already that we were shifting to this vote center model, throughout LA County, and that, you know, our neighborhood polling stations were no longer.
Mhm.
Now imagine shifting to a vote by mail model where about more than half of voters who vote don't vote by mail regularly. And so, you know, our fear, or my biggest anxiety at least, is, you know, we don't want to lose a chunk of those voters, you know,
Mhm.
simply because information was not translated. And
Mhm.
so, you know, the challenge that I think is upon us, and it's really the challenge that is helping to guide, you know, our program development for the fall, is trying to get these low to mid propensity voters, voters who maybe don't turn out as much during the midterms, turn out once every few presidential elections, but voters who are critical to deciding the outcome of races up and down the ballot, that we
Mhm.
get them engaged, that we ID them in terms of their support for potential issues, and that we turn them out to
Mhm.
vote.
Mhm.
Um, and so you know, we're going to double down with Long Beach Rising, the coalition that we help co-anchor with you all at Long Beach Forward.
Mhm.
And we're going to try and figure this thing out, because it is a challenge, especially when you won't have door-to-door engagement because
Mhm.
of the pandemic, which is very real. We need to be mindful of. But what are we going to do to flex our digital muscle, to
Mhm.
flex, you know, our creative minds, to try and get people involved in this election?
Mhm.
Because it really is the most important election of our time.
Absolutely. There's some really historic things on the ballot right now. I mean, schools and communities first, those are things that I know people have been talking about it longer for me, but maybe in my consciousness, it's been the last, like, 12 or 13 years that it's like, this needs to get fixed.
Yeah.
So, like, just that in itself, having this moment, but so many critical races, so many, critical issues, and just this totally different landscape that we're in. So I know that we'll figure it out. Like, we're going to do our best to get those folks out to vote, encourage people, get people the information they need. And knowing that voting, that elections are one piece of the movement. They're not the movement, they're not the be all end all, but they are a critical place. If you want to see policy change, one, you have the opportunity to directly vote on policy, in some cases, and also you have the opportunity to vote on the people who shape the policy, who vote on it. And so it is a really critical time.
Yeah, and I think, you know, to reiterate, you know, kind of what you had mentioned, Don had communicated to you, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like, you know, how do we get people who want to take action, who want to take
Mm-hmm.
action on behalf of our communities? And
Mm-hmm.
so it really is up to us. And I think, you know, making sure we're able to have an impact on different races and on these critical issues, like schools and communities first,
Mm-hmm.
like the repeal of Proposition 209, you know,
Mm-hmm.
like fighting back against
Yes.
this Uber and Lyft, you know,
Mm-hmm.
initiative that's trying to erode worker protections for gig workers. You know,
Mm-hmm.
there's endless amounts of things that can be confusing, but I'm here to say we will help you navigate all that. You know, we'll provide educational materials on it. We'll, you know, potentially virtual forums, right, for you to get plugged in. The
Mm-hmm.
important part, though, is that you flex that muscle and you prepare yourself to vote on November 3rd.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Awesome. Well, there is a lot going on right now. What are you doing for self-care during this time?
Woo, self-care. It's important. Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's hard because, we're not going out much at all. You
Yeah.
know, I think one thing that I used to do a lot, I did cross country in high school, actually, and a little bit in
Mm-hmm.
college. And yeah, I got a little busy, I think, after college and running. I kind of fell out of running, you know, for a long time. But I actually, before the pandemic, was training for a half marathon. And so
Oh.
last December, I was like, I'm going to get back into it. And so I got back into it, you know, I was doing it pretty regularly. Then my half marathon got canceled because of the pandemic, rightly so. It needed to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But I tell myself, you know, you've done all this work, just keep at it. And so I've, you know, my form of self-care, it's almost meditative for me,
Mm-hmm.
because it's an exercise in challenging myself,
Mm-hmm.
is running, and I do it with a mask, which is very hard to do.
Mm-hmm.
But it is very fun. And I think, uh, you know, the thing I love most about running is that it never gets easier. You just get better. And I think that's
Yeah.
such a metaphor for like a lot of different things is, you know, we get better at what we do. And so for me, I've really taken, a love for running and what it
Mhm.
can do for helping balance me out. Plus, it's nice in the
Mhm.
mornings. It's better than getting out in the middle of the day or doing something. So I appreciate that a lot.
That's awesome. It's such a good way to start your day. And especially we spend so much time on the computers, like reading emails, all that mental energy, to have this kind of physical outlet and that also place of just kind of letting things flow through your mind. So
Yeah.
that's great.
Yeah.
Thank you. Hopefully you inspired some folks out there to put on their running shoes too. What, if any, glimmers of hope do you see coming out of this time?
I mean, I think if one thing is very clear, there's a hunger for change.
Mhm.
I think and I've seen it. I mean, I think people's desire to be involved, to ask questions, to make phone calls, to send letters to their decision makers. I haven't seen it this elevated in a long time. And so
Mhm.
I think for me, it gives me hope knowing that people are active, they're aware, they're frustrated, and they're looking for vehicles to put their energy in. And I do feel we're at a point where folks are agitated enough where there's probably no going back,
Yeah.
and that makes me happy because I
Mhm.
think, agitation is important to making
Mhm.
things get done and to changing things. And so, if anything, the glimmer of hope is seeing the activation from community members
Mhm.
and seeing November get closer and hoping we can build a bridge between those two.
Yes.
Because I think for me, there's obviously a lot at stake personally in terms of what I believe in and what's
Mhm.
coming forward. But I think a lot of people want to participate, and I've seen that through our digital actions and through our
Mhm.
conversations and the work that we're doing. And so I'm actually hopeful that the engagement that residents have this time around is going to lead us to something uh, hopefully better than where we are now
Yeah.
in a few months' time.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's this time where folks can get involved, whether they can vote or not, whether they're too young, they're not able to vote for other reasons. There's still a lot of ways to get out the vote and encourage people to, just get out there and be heard.
Yes.
Um, yeah. So how can people get involved in and support Long Beach Coalition's work?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a couple ways. Obviously, if you want to find us on Facebook at LB Coalition, you just type in Long Beach Coalition, we'll come up. Our name is Long Beach Coalition for Good Jobs in a Healthy Community. It's way too long. But if you type in Long Beach Coalition, you'll find us there. We're also on Twitter, at LB Coalition. And I think plugging into our channels there, you'll be able to see opportunities for engagement. Send us a note via those channels and we'll get you plugged in. There's plenty of opportunities for folks to get involved. We're excited to partner with great organizations like Long Beach Forward, with Libre, with Housing Long Beach, and the rest of the Housing Justice Coalition organizations,
Mhm.
KGA, you name it. We're
Mhm.
all involved in the same efforts, and so getting involved in getting involved with us is really getting involved with everyone,
Mhm.
because I think that's how we're building community and building community power.
Yeah, absolutely. Over the years, it's just the work of the Long Beach Coalition and the connection with the Building Healthy Communities initiative, I think has really solidified how important that collaboration and coalition work is in Long Beach. So, well, thank you so much today for joining me today and for the conversation. It was really good to connect with you.
It was fun. Thanks so much, Christine.
All right, take
All right, bye.
care.